So as you all know, Donald Trump is currently touring Asia, and one thing that's a little bit odd about his trip is that he is, for some reason, lobbying for the TPP. So when he was elected, liberals and progressives like myself were rightfully saying, well, you know, this is terrifying, but the one good thing about Donald Trump is that he'd most likely kill the TPP. Well, all of a sudden, the TPP is back, and Donald Trump resurrected it after killing it. So according to SV Date of the Huffington Post, he reports lower trade barriers, better protections for intellectual property, more banking transparency. Those were some of the provisions in the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiated by the Obama administration that Donald Trump bashed on the campaign trail and then withdrew from days after becoming president. 10 months later, as Trump heads to Vietnam during his trip to Asia, the White House says it is hoping to achieve these goals: lower trade barriers, better protections for intellectual property, more banking transparency. Senior Trump administration officials, speaking on the condition of anonymity, defended the move as consistent with Trump's desire to have multiple one-on-one trade deals with countries rather than a single agreement like the TPP, which included a dozen nations. Trump's own experience before he was in politics gave him a very firm conviction that on a bilateral basis, he would be able to achieve higher standards and better terms for American workers and for American business, one official said. Okay, so first of all, I do take issue with the way that this article characterizes the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because it says that it was only about, you know, lower trade barriers, better protections for intellectual property, and more banking transparency. But to suggest that that's all that was entailed with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, well, that's a gross oversimplification, because this agreement was much more terrifying and Orwellian than that. If you all remember correctly, Obama's administration wouldn't even allow us to see the deal, and he wanted it fast-tracked through Congress with a simple yes or no vote with virtually no debate, because the so-called free trade deal jeopardized our own country's sovereignty. It literally allowed an international corporate entity to override our own regulations when it comes to protections for workers, when it comes to climate change, when it comes to food regulations. So even though this article frames Donald Trump's newfangled support for the TPP as some kind of tacit admission that he was wrong and Obama was right, what this really tells us is that Donald Trump actually liked the TPP. He just didn't like that it was a multilateral agreement, and he wanted to enact the TPP on a bilateral basis with multiple countries. But by disagreeing with the TPP on a technicality, and presumably disagreeing with it on the basis that he doesn't think this should be a multilateral agreement, he was duping over people who thought he was against the TPP. He was pretending as though he cared about workers and he didn't want this deal to ship more jobs overseas, as it inevitably would have, but he was just being disingenuous, because even though he was technically against the TPP, again, he supported it just on a bilateral basis. Now, part of the reason why he is suddenly pushing for this on his trip to Asia is because presumably, well, he was always in favor of the TPP and was just being disingenuous about it, but most of all, is that he's kind of being backed into a corner, because the 11 other countries that President Obama was negotiating with, well, they're now kind of coming together without the United States, and they might still sign the deal anyway, and Europe might step up to fill that void that the United States left. So he's kind of thinking, well, I kind of want in on this. But instead, he's trying to make this about, you know, a bilateral trade agreement. So it has all the same provisions as the TPP. It hurts workers, makes it so that way corporations can override our sovereignty, but it's not multilateral. It's just on a bilateral basis. So the one thing about Donald Trump and his administration that was a positive, now completely invalid. He supports the TPP. There's no silver lining anymore. I mean, in anything that is a positive that you can extrapolate from these corrupt politicians, it turns into a negative later on down the line. You know, what I will say about Trump is he was at least politically astute enough to know that the TPP was not a very smart strategy. You know, to come out and endorse that's bad for politics, which is part of the reason why he won. And Hillary Clinton, she didn't come out enough against the TPP. She kind of had this tepid opposition, you know, that she took to the TPP, and none of us believed that she would actually not sign the agreement. Donald Trump was smart to, you know, play this card. But, you know, behind the scenes, he wanted the TPP. And he figured if he could get the TPP in a roundabout way, not multilaterally, but through bilateral arrangements, then, he still gets to make a lot of money with his business dealings in Asian countries. I mean, you gotta hand it to him. This guy's dumb, but at least he was smart when it comes to this. And not in a good way, smart in a way that fucks all of us over. The TPP is the zombie of politics that will never go away, so we might as well at this point just look at it as inevitable, because no matter who's in office, we're getting the TPP, be it multilaterally or bilaterally, it's gonna be a reality. It seems like we have no choice.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.